This little dog was found tied to a tree this summer, with fishing line, not even a rope. He was lucky someone found him. Paradoxically, the court ruled that the dog be returned to its owner, because the owner doesn't know who tied it to the tree. Such is Poland. Such are the realities of post-Soviet countries and their satellites. For some time now, especially on Instagram, you can see a wonderful map of Europe showing the number of dogs per capita, some because there's no data from most countries. It shows that in some Eastern European countries, some, because data was not available there, most of them, they have the highest number of dogs per capita. Yet, Ukraine wasn't there. I don't know if they were trying to curry favor, because it's no secret that dogs have the worst life in Romania and Ukraine. 3 boards covered with plastic make a doghouse, which is even used as a promotional item for the country, and no one see nothing bad on it. Many have also forgotten that Ukraine used to clean the streets of dogs with fire. For the Euro matches, which was hosted with Poland a few years ago, stray dogs were simply thrown into the oven. Many were alive. Nobody remembers this anymore, although many protested at the time. Human comfortable memory. As someone from Scandinavia rightly pointed out in comments, maybe it's less here, but let's compare the living conditions of a dog. Exactly. I would definitely prefer the Scandinavian population and the living conditions of dogs in Scandinavian homes. Of course, I'm referring to sane families where zoophilia isn't encouraged. Even Satanists say it's clearly not, it's a different species. The situation is definitely best in the Czech Republic, where the mind has always been steeped in German thinking. This stems from historical influences, although even there, chains and lack of food are quite common. Not like in Poland, but common. Here's a sweet dog from Poland, found tied to a tree this summer. Would you think something happened to the owner? No, because the case was dismissed, as the owner claims he didn't tie the dog to the tree and doesn't know who. He also refuses to relinquish the dog, even though he doesn't see it at the shelter. Will the dog be returned? Possible. What will happen to the dog? It will probably end worse. Such sentences are quite common in Poland. The most famous was the case of a spaniel who was abused in a stairwell by the dog's neighbor, and then set on fire in the elevator. He didn't like the dog because the neighbor let him out alone in the stairwell. It's true that in some countries, as a human being, it's better not to walk alone, even if social media praises it, let alone as a dog. The second case involved a dog beaten and buried alive. The policeman who found him tried to adopt him and gave a home. The owner also denied involvement. The case dragged on for years. Even the dog was almost returned to its owner, years later, as the first instance ruled, until the matter began to gain traction in the press. This little dog, thanks to this decision, will either be returned to its owner, and we know exactly what will happen to it. This time, it will be better disposed of, or it will remain in the shelter because the owner is in a difficult situation and is considering whether to leave, but has never visited the dog. I feel sorry for this dog, because it really wants to be petted and will languish in the shelter. Of course, Russia cleaned its streets in the same way before the match, although in the 1990s in Moscow itself, due to the changes associated with the fall of the wall, the streets were full of homeless children and homeless dogs. Moreover, there are known cases of dogs raising these children, and they grew into quite intelligent people. It's taboo, but that's how it was there. In St. Petersburg during World War II, feral cats that people fed with pieces of bread reciprocated by sharing hunted birds. We know 2 cats by name who fed 2 tenement houses this way. They saved a very small percentage of the residents, as the siege of St. Petersburg was a massacre for all sides. Both have monuments, and yet despite this extreme behavior, the streets were cleaned as they were cleaned. Why is this happening? Firstly, judges aren't objective, and certainly not unpolitical despite the claims. They also have their own political views. Although they don't officially belong to a political party, they have plenty of friends there, which stems from their role. And as the recent vote on the essentially dead-end law in Poland banning dogs on chains demonstrated, many MPs from the most important parties voted against it, to avoid offending voters who can't imagine a dog without a chain. Secondly, let's be honest, judges don't like animals either, and in the case of the spaniel, the judge proudly mentioned it, supposedly impartial. Thirdly, there's the overpopulation of dogs and the lack of investment in shelters outside of tourist cities. where shelters are essentially just for show, a propaganda tool for how well we function. And all post-Soviet countries are perfectly capable of practicing propaganda, because 20 kilometers away, there are already killing grounds where several dogs are kept in kennels, fighting over everything, a bowl, a kennel. This lack of investment means shelters are pushing animals out without checking where they end up. Philip Prozek brilliantly demonstrated this in his two Czech films Gump. Unfortunately, they're Czech, so they're difficult to access, which leads people behind the former wall to believe the propaganda coming from the East, starting with the EU's border countries. It really doesn't matter whether we're talking about those in the EU or not. It was a single entity, including satellites, for too long to change mentality so quickly. This also stems from the fact that in the legal provisions of these countries, an animal is equated with an object. An animal is an object. It has no rights. A bailiff can seize an animal to cover a debt. This also applies to dogs, so they can be sold. And this is happening. Until the law changes the status of animals, we will not get rid of the perception of animals as objects. Such bills were drafted, but they were defeated. Animals in zoos are museum pieces. That old Stalinist notion of an owner as an object still reigns supreme. It's as deeply ingrained as the idea that there's no town with fewer than 200 houses. You get a number, but GPS doesn't pick it up, and even the police or an ambulance can't reach your home on call. Whatever. Governments also don't inspect shelters. Anyone can open them, which officials are happy about because they have clean streets. Often, it's a so-called stub committee, and the official in charge sees it as a very profitable business. The EU donates huge amounts of money to shelters, but it goes to the officials, not the shelters, because the union thinks they're dealing with people like them. Governors also donate money, many in Russia really, but the money never reaches the animals. They simply don't bother to ask if something's missing from the invoice. No one inspects these shelters. They operate undercover for years. Even if people send letters to the newspapers complaining that it smells like dead bodies. And there have been plenty of such cases just in Poland or Czech. And what next? We have a charming terrier-type dog that was tied to a tree. A dog that, as you can see in the video, still likes people and isn't ruined by the shelter. A dog that, thanks to their brilliant minds as they call themselves, will probably return to his poor owner and end up buried under a tree. That's the reality of this story. That's how it works in these countries. If you can pressure them to change something and start educating the public, then do it, instead of blindly donating EU funds. Here, you can even make money from neutering cats. That's why it's so important for people abroad to know about this, especially celebrities who also have pets. They've started to take an interest and expose this mess. Of course, if the legal system doesn't work in simple matters, it doesn't work in others either. And that's the way it is. In some countries, reforms have become so confusing that soon they'll be annulling divorces, because it's unclear who the judge is. Or because of legal loopholes. People are more likely to fight for divorce, because it affects the majority. Animal issues less so. If we don't talk about it and expose it, we'll continue to allow what's happening in supposedly civilized countries in the 21st century. Some are in the EU, but it affects everyone. Those who are and those who aren't. The situation for animals will remain reminiscent of the Victorian era, as dogfighting is already making a comeback due to poverty. This isn't the Middle Ages. Contrary to appearances, in the Middle Ages, if an animal did something wrong, it could have a trial and a lawyer. Only after a guilty verdict was issued was the sentence passed. And today, the ignorant say that animal rights are a fantasy. It never existed. It existed until when the man in the circle appeared, and it disappeared. The man in the circle, who can be overthrown by scoliosis. But does that mean that someone with scoliosis has no right to live? Has. Thanks, man in the cycle hasn't for many ages, but we grew up from it.